They told her she was marrying the weakest species in the galaxy. And somewhere deep inside, a quiet voice has been telling you the same thing about yourself. Weak, ordinary, replaceable. That word doesn't shout, it whispers. It slips into your mind during failures. It tightens its grip when you compare your life to someone else's highlight reel. It shows up when you hesitate, when you overthink, when you almost take action but pull back at the last second. And slowly, without realizing it, you begin to shape your identity around it. You start playing smaller. You lower your expectations before the world can lower them for you. You avoid risks so you can avoid embarrassment. You tell yourself it's realistic. You call it being practical. But deep down, it's fear wearing logic as a disguise. Here's the brutal truth. Most people are not crushed by reality. They are crushed by the story they accept about themselves. When someone is labeled the weakest, the assumption is simple: no threat, no dominance, no future impact. Easy to control, easy to ignore, and that's exactly how you've allowed your doubts to treat you. Like you're harmless, like your ambition is naive, like your potential is exaggerated. But weakness is rarely a lack of strength. It's a lack of belief in strength. And belief is powerful. It dictates posture. It dictates tone. It dictates action. When belief shrinks, behavior shrinks. When behavior shrinks, results shrink. And when results shrink, the label feels confirmed. A vicious cycle. A silent trap. You felt it. The hesitation before speaking up. The urge to stay quiet in rooms where you belong. The habit of settling for less because aiming higher feels arrogant. That's not humility. That's conditioning. The world benefits when you doubt yourself. Competition decreases. Standards lower. Expectations fade. And the moment you accept that you are small, everyone else feels bigger without having to improve. That's the hidden game. The label of weakness is not just an insult. It's a strategy. Because if you believe you are limited, you will never test your limits. If you believe you are fragile, you will avoid pressure. If you believe you are ordinary, you will never attempt anything extraordinary. And nothing threatens the status quo more than someone who refuses to accept their assigned role. The most dangerous transformation doesn't begin with applause. It begins with rejection, with humiliation, with being underestimated so completely that no one sees the shift happening beneath the surface. That's where power starts forming. Not in comfort, not in validation, but in the moment you decide the label ends here. Because the truth is simple and uncomfortable. The title of weakest only survives as long as you keep repeating it. The second you question it, it begins to crack, and once it cracks, everything changes. Weak. One word, one verdict, one silent sentence that can shape an entire destiny if it's accepted without resistance. Labels are dangerous because they simplify complexity. They reduce potential to a headline. They turn evolving beings into fixed conclusions. And once a label sticks, it begins to dictate behavior. Not because it's true, but because it's believed. From an early age, subtle messages start forming invisible boundaries. Not leadership material, not disciplined enough, not naturally gifted, not built for greatness. Over time, those phrases stop sounding like opinions and start feeling like facts. Identity forms around them. Decisions shrink to fit them. That is, how limitation is manufactured. The harsh realization is this: most limitations were never tested. They were assumed, adopted, repeated, until they felt permanent. Weakness is rarely a physical condition. It's a psychological agreement, an internal contract signed without negotiation. Once that contract is signed, effort decreases, standards soften, risks feel unnecessary. Why push harder if the outcome is already decided? That mindset is more destructive than failure. Failure teaches. It sharpens awareness. It builds resilience. But believing you are weak? That stops action before it even begins. It convinces you not to try. It protects ego at the cost of growth. Another uncomfortable truth emerges here. People often cling to weakness because it removes responsibility. If the identity is not capable, then there's no pressure to perform, no expectation to rise, no burden of excellence. Weakness becomes a shield, but shields also block opportunity. Underestimation from others is not the real danger. Internal underestimation is. When doubt becomes a default setting, ambition quietly fades. Dreams shrink to manageable sizes. Goals become safe, predictable, unthreatening, and safe goals never create legends. Strength is not always visible. It doesn't always roar. Sometimes it waits. It develops quietly beneath judgment. But it cannot develop at all if the mind keeps reinforcing the idea of inadequacy. Belief influences biology. Posture changes when confidence rises. Energy shifts when conviction strengthens. Decisions become bolder when identity expands. Everything follows belief. So if belief is poisoned, everything downstream suffers. The turning point begins with a single refusal, the refusal to let a label define the future. Not through loud rebellion, not through dramatic declarations, but through disciplined contradiction. Every action that challenges the label weakens it. Every small win chips away at it. Every moment of courage rewrites it. Identity is not discovered, it is constructed, and construction requires effort. The galaxy mocked what it did not understand because it measured strength by surface traits. That same mistake happens every day in ordinary lives. Value gets judged by comparison. Power gets judged by noise. Potential gets judged by early performance. But growth is rarely linear. Strength often hides in plain sight. The word weak only has power if it is accepted as truth. The moment it is treated as a challenge instead of a conclusion, it transforms from an insult into fuel, and fuel, when used correctly, ignites revolutions. Underestimation is a strange kind of gift. It feels like disrespect, but it carries hidden freedom. When expectations are low, pressure disappears. When no one anticipates greatness, no one watches closely. And in that blind spot, transformation becomes possible. Most people fear being overlooked. They crave recognition, validation, acknowledgement. They want to be seen as capable before they have built the proof. But there is power in invisibility. There is power in being dismissed. Because when nothing is expected, nothing restricts growth. Expectation can be a cage. It forces performance instead of progress. It demands immediate results instead of long-term development. But underestimation removes that burden. It creates space to experiment, to fail quietly, to refine without judgment. That space is priceless. Here is a shocking truth. The moment people stop believing in someone can become the exact moment real growth begins. When applause fades, discipline must replace it. When encouragement disappears, internal drive must take over. And internal drive is far stronger than external praise. External praise creates performers. Internal drive creates warriors. Being underestimated strips away the need to impress. It removes the obsession with appearing strong and replaces it with the opportunity to actually become strong. There is a difference. Appearing powerful requires attention. Becoming powerful requires effort. Most choose appearance, the underestimated choose development. Silence becomes an ally. While others broadcast their plans, chase attention, and seek validation, growth happens quietly in the background. Skills sharpen, endurance builds, mindset hardens. No announcements, no noise, just steady evolution, and evolution that happens in silence often shocks the loudest critics. Another harsh realization surfaces here. Many people fear being underestimated because it threatens their ego. They want respect now. They want recognition now. But respect earned too early often collapses under pressure. Recognition without foundation creates fragility. Underestimation forces foundation building. It demands patience. It demands humility. It demands consistency without applause. That process is uncomfortable. It bruises pride. It tests commitment. But it produces durability. There is something dangerous about a person who has nothing to protect, no reputation to defend, no image to maintain. That person can take risks others avoid. That person can push beyond comfort because there is no standard to preserve. That is freedom disguised as insult. The underestimated individual learns to detach from opinion. Mockery becomes background noise. Doubt becomes predictable. Criticism becomes expected. And when something is expected, it loses its power to destabilize. Confidence built in validation is fragile. Confidence built in adversity is unshakable. The dangerous power of underestimation lies in surprise. When transformation finally becomes visible, it disrupts assumptions. It challenges narratives. It forces reevaluation. And by then, the foundation is too strong to shake. Underestimation is not a verdict. It is an opportunity. It is the quiet season before impact. It is the calm before demonstration. Those who recognize this do not waste energy arguing against doubt. They convert it. They let disbelief fuel discipline. They let dismissal sharpen focus. And when the time comes to reveal what has been built in silence, the shock is not accidental. It is earned. Strength is not forged in celebration. It is forged in isolation. In the quiet hours when no one is watching. In the long stretches where progress feels invisible. In the moments when quitting would be easy and unnoticed. Rejection has a way of stripping everything down to the core. No applause, no reassurance, no comforting voices promising that everything will work out. Just silence. And in that silence, a decision must be made. Retreat into self-pity or rise into resilience. Most choose retreat. It feels justified. It feels reasonable. After all, being overlooked hurts. Being doubted stings. Being dismissed bruises pride. But pain is not the enemy. Avoiding pain is. Pressure reveals composition. It exposes the difference between desire and commitment. Anyone can talk about ambition when conditions are comfortable. Anyone can claim strength when circumstances are favorable. But remove the support, remove the recognition, remove the immediate reward. That is where truth shows itself. Isolation forces self-confrontation. Without distraction, excuses echo louder. Blame becomes harder to sustain. There is no audience to perform for, no sympathy to collect. Just raw accountability. And accountability is heavy. It demands ownership of effort, ownership of habits, ownership of outcomes. Another harsh truth surfaces here. Potential means nothing without endurance. Talent fades under sustained pressure. Motivation collapses when results delay. What remains is discipline, and discipline is built alone. The overlooked hours matter more than the visible moments. The repetition no one sees. The refinement no one applauds. The corrections made without public acknowledgement. That is where the foundation hardens. Most people underestimate the value of solitude because it feels lonely. But solitude is not emptiness. It is construction space. It is where identity reshapes itself without interference. It is where weaknesses are faced directly instead of hidden behind distraction. There is a difference between being alone and being abandoned. One is circumstance, the other is mindset. Isolation can either convince someone they are forgotten, or it can remind them that they are responsible for their own rise. Legends are not created in crowds. Crowds arrive after the transformation. Before respect comes repetition. Before recognition comes resilience. Before victory comes endurance. Discomfort becomes the training ground. Doubt becomes resistance weight. Fatigue becomes proof of effort. Each challenge, instead of breaking resolve, strengthens it. Each obstacle becomes material for growth rather than justification for surrender. The uncomfortable reality is that most people do not fail because they lack ability. They fail because they avoid sustained discomfort. They chase quick wins. They seek instant validation. They retreat when results take too long. Isolation removes shortcuts. In that space, there are no hacks, no applause, no rescue, just work. Just repetition. Just improvement layered slowly over time. And when strength is built this way, it does not depend on environment. It does not collapse under criticism. It does not require encouragement to continue. It stands on its own. Isolation is not punishment. It is preparation. And those who endure it without folding do not emerge the same as they entered. They emerge unbreakable. There comes a moment when the entire battle shifts inward. Not toward proving critics wrong, not toward silencing doubt with dramatic displays, but toward a quieter, more dangerous objective, becoming undeniably capable. Trying to prove others wrong is emotional. It burns hot and fast. It feeds on anger, pride, resentment, and emotions, while powerful, are unstable. They surge, they fade, they exhaust. Building a life on revenge is like building on sand. It feels strong in the moment, but it collapses when the emotion cools. Proving capability is different. It is calm. It is calculated. It does not care who is watching. It does not require witnesses. It focuses on standards instead of applause. That is the shift that changes everything. When the goal becomes internal growth rather than external validation, discipline strengthens. Effort becomes consistent instead of reactive. Progress becomes steady instead of dramatic. The energy once wasted on arguments, comparisons, and silent competitions gets redirected into skill, endurance, and precision. Another uncomfortable truth appears here. Chasing validation keeps power in other people's hands. If approval determines motivation, then criticism determines collapse. That is dependency disguised as ambition. Independence begins when standards are self-imposed. Small, daily standards, non-negotiable habits, quiet commitments kept even when inconvenient, waking up when it would be easier to sleep, practicing when it would be easier to postpone, refining when it would be easier to settle. These decisions seem minor, they look insignificant, but repeated consistently, they compound into transformation. Most people underestimate the power of small discipline because it lacks drama. There is no instant breakthrough, no overnight metamorphosis, just incremental improvement layered relentlessly, over time. That is where real strength forms. When the focus shifts from proving worth to building competence, something stabilizes internally. Confidence no longer depends on opinion. It begins to root itself in evidence. Evidence built through repetition, through effort, through showing up even when motivation disappears. Motivation is unreliable. Standards are not. This is where identity begins to evolve. Not through affirmations, not through declarations, but through alignment between words and actions. Every promise kept to oneself reinforces credibility. Every avoided excuse strengthens integrity. Integrity builds self-respect, and self-respect eliminates the need for external applause. There is power in knowing that ability has been earned, not gifted, not exaggerated, earned. That knowledge creates calm confidence, not arrogance, not noise, just certainty. The weakest label begins to dissolve not because it was argued against, but because it no longer matches reality. This shift demands patience. It demands delayed gratification. It demands the willingness to be unimpressive for a while. Growth is rarely glamorous in its early stages. It looks ordinary. It feels repetitive. It tests endurance. But beneath that repetition, foundations are solidifying. The difference between those who remain underestimated and those who outgrow it lies here. One group waits for recognition before committing. The other commits first and lets recognition catch up later. Capability first, validation second. That order changes destinies. And once the focus locks onto growth instead of revenge, the transformation becomes inevitable. Power rarely arrives with noise. It does not explode into existence in a single dramatic moment. It accumulates quietly, layer by layer, decision by decision. The awakening most people wait for is not an event. It is a process. Every disciplined action adds weight to the foundation. Every repeated effort strengthens structure. At first, the change feels invisible. Results lag behind effort, Progress hides beneath the surface. Doubt whispers that nothing is happening, but something is happening. Growth compounds in silence. Each time responsibility is chosen over blame, internal authority increases. Each time effort is chosen over excuses, resilience deepens. Each time discomfort is faced instead of avoided, capacity expands. These moments seem small in isolation. Together, they redefine identity. Another hard truth surfaces here. Most people sabotage their own awakening because they are addicted to comfort. Comfort feels safe. It reduces stress. It avoids confrontation. But comfort also maintains stagnation. It keeps ability dormant. It preserves mediocrity. Comfort is not peace. It is paralysis disguised as security. The mind adapts quickly to ease. Standards lower subtly. Effort becomes optional. Discipline becomes conditional. Soon, potential begins to decay from neglect rather than inability. Awakening requires friction. Friction challenges belief systems. It tests endurance. It exposes weaknesses that must be strengthened rather than hidden. Without friction, there is no sharpening. Without resistance, there is no growth. Most avoid resistance because it threatens ego. Struggle highlights flaws. Failure exposes gaps. Effort reveals how far there is to go. It is easier to remain comfortable than to confront inadequacy head-on. But avoiding confrontation with weakness guarantees permanent weakness. The awakening begins the moment avoidance stops. There is a shift that happens when discomfort is no longer seen as an enemy, but as evidence of expansion. Fatigue becomes proof of effort. Obstacles become training tools. Pressure becomes refinement. Energy changes at that point. Focus sharpens. Standards rise naturally. Discipline stops feeling forced and starts feeling necessary. Consistency becomes the weapon, not intensity, not bursts of motivation. Consistency. Showing up repeatedly when results are slow. Continuing when excitement fades. Adjusting without quitting. Another shocking realization emerges. Dramatic transformation is usually the result of boring repetition. The legendary breakthrough everyone admires is built on countless unseen, unimpressive days of disciplined work. There is nothing glamorous about accumulation. It requires patience. It requires trust in the process before evidence becomes visible. It requires belief strong enough to outlast temporary disappointment. But accumulation is unstoppable. Each disciplined action stacks upon the last. Momentum builds quietly. Capacity increases subtly. Confidence roots itself deeper with every completed commitment. And then, one day, the shift becomes undeniable. Not because it happened suddenly, but because it was happening all along. The awakening is not about becoming someone else. It is about activating what was already present but undeveloped. Power was never absent. It was untrained. Once trained, once refined, once reinforced through relentless consistency, it no longer needs validation. It simply stands. There comes a point where distraction is no longer possible. No more blaming timing, no more blaming circumstances, no more pointing outward, just a mirror, and the mirror is honest. It reflects hesitation. It reflects inconsistency. It reflects wasted potential disguised as waiting for the right moment. That reflection is uncomfortable because it removes every shield. It forces confrontation with habits that have been tolerated for too long. Where is life being played small? Where are standards lowered to avoid pressure? Where is comfort being chosen over growth while pretending it is strategy? These questions sting because they expose choice. Another harsh realization rises here. Most stagnation is self-inflicted. Not because of lack of intelligence, not because of lack of resources, but because of avoidance. Avoidance of effort. Avoidance of risk. Avoidance of temporary embarrassment. Avoidance feels safe in the moment. It protects ego from immediate discomfort. But over time, it erodes self-respect. And once self-respect weakens, ambition follows. There is no dramatic rescue coming, no sudden intervention that transforms discipline overnight. Waiting for inspiration is a delay tactic. Waiting for perfect conditions is procrastination wearing sophistication. Responsibility is heavy because it removes excuses. When outcomes are owned fully, improvement becomes mandatory. There is no one else to credit, no one else to blame. Progress, or decline, rests entirely on daily decisions. That level of ownership is rare. Many prefer the illusion of powerlessness because it offers emotional comfort. If circumstances are blamed, then effort can remain minimal without guilt. If external forces are blamed, then internal change feels unnecessary. But blaming externally while expecting internal growth is contradiction. The mirror does not argue. It does not exaggerate, it simply reflects patterns, missed opportunities, inconsistent discipline, unrealized ability. Facing that reflection requires courage. Courage to admit where excuses have replaced effort. Courage to admit where fear has dictated choices. Courage to admit that potential has been present but underused. Another shocking truth surfaces. Decay is automatic. Growth is intentional. Without deliberate effort, standards slip. Skills dull. Confidence fades. Comfort expands. Decline does not require decision. It requires neglect. And neglect is subtle. It starts with one postponed task, one skipped commitment, one rationalized shortcut. Over time, those small compromises accumulate. Momentum shifts in the wrong direction. Weakness begins to feel familiar, again. The mirror reveals this clearly, but it also reveals something powerful: control. If decline is built through small daily neglect, growth can be built through small daily discipline. If weakness forms through repeated avoidance, strength forms through repeated confrontation. The mirror is not an enemy. It is a checkpoint. It demands honesty. It demands clarity. It demands the courage to stop pretending, because pretending delays progress. It maintains mediocrity. It protects comfort at the expense of capability. The turning point begins when reflection leads to decision, not guilt, not shame. Decision. Decision to raise standards. Decision to eliminate excuses. Decision to act without waiting for motivation. No, rescue is coming, but transformation does not require rescue. It requires responsibility. A war legend is not born in a single moment of glory. It is carved slowly through refusal. Refusal to surrender to humiliation. Refusal to internalize doubt. Refusal to accept the role assigned by others. The transformation begins quietly. No dramatic announcement. No visible shift that the world immediately recognizes. Just a decision. Weakness will not be permanent. That decision changes posture. It changes standards. It changes tolerance. Most people misunderstand legends. They assume extraordinary talent, rare genetics, perfect timing. But legend status is less about gifts and more about thresholds. Specifically, the threshold of what someone is willing to endure without breaking. Endurance is the dividing line. When pressure increases, most retreat to safety. They rationalize stepping back. They convince themselves it is strategic. But those who become legends interpret pressure differently. They see it as confirmation that growth is happening. Another hard truth emerges here. Humiliation can either scar identity or sharpen it. It depends on response. If humiliation is accepted as proof of inadequacy, it cripples. If it is treated as temporary misjudgment, it fuels. Fuel is powerful when directed. Refusal does not mean reckless defiance. It means disciplined contradiction. Every time doubt whispers limitation, action responds with effort. Every time fear suggests retreat, standards demand forward movement. Consistency in that contradiction builds power. There is no need for loud declarations, no need to argue with critics. Silence combined with improvement is far more threatening. While others talk, the foundation thickens. While others judge, capability expands. The weakest label begins to fracture under sustained discipline. Another realization surfaces. Legends are built beside those who demand more. Environments influence expectations. When surrounded by Mediocrity. Mediocrity feels acceptable. When aligned with higher standards, average feels uncomfortable. Alignment matters. Standing beside strength long enough reshapes identity. Expectations rise. Tolerance for excuses shrinks. Performance becomes habit instead of effort. But none of this happens without refusal. Refusal to let one bad outcome define the entire story. Refusal to let one critic dictate direction. Refusal to let comfort reclaim control. Legends are not fearless. Fear exists. Doubt exists. Fatigue exists. The difference lies in response. Instead of retreating, forward motion continues. Instead of collapsing under pressure, adaptation occurs. Adaptation is evolution in action. Each confrontation with difficulty increases capacity. Each disciplined choice reinforces identity. Over time, the gap between former weakness and current strength widens so dramatically that the old label feels absurd. But it was not absurd in the beginning. It felt real. It felt convincing. That is why refusal matters so much. Without it, the story would have ended early. Without it, potential would have remained dormant. A war legend is simply someone who refused to remain what they were called. Refusal, endurance, alignment, discipline. Layer those consistently, and transformation becomes unavoidable. The galaxy does not create legends. Decisions do. Power changes everything. Not just status, not just results. Responsibility. The moment strength becomes real, excuses lose their hiding place. Weakness can justify delay. Power cannot. Once capability is built, underperformance becomes a decision, not a limitation. That realization is heavy. It is easier to operate from a place of not ready. It is easier to say more preparation is needed, more time is required, more support is necessary. But when evidence of strength exists, when discipline has been proven, when resilience has been tested, hesitation becomes dishonest. Another harsh truth emerges here. Growth removes the comfort of victimhood. It strips away the narrative that circumstances are in control. It demands ownership at a higher level, ownership of standards, ownership of impact, ownership of influence. Because strength influences others whether intended or not. When someone rises beyond limitation, it shifts expectations in the surrounding environment. Mediocrity feels exposed. Excuses sound weaker. Complaints feel hollow. That is the weight of power. It demands consistency. It demands alignment between capability and action. Falling short no longer feels like failure. It feels like betrayal of potential, and potential, once realized, cannot be unseen. There is a dangerous edge to this stage. Confidence can either mature into discipline or decay into arrogance. The difference lies in humility. True power does not need to announce itself. It focuses on maintaining standards rather than showcasing superiority. Another shocking realization surfaces. Once strength is built, the challenge intensifies. Expectations rise internally. The margin for self-deception narrows. Comfort attempts to return disguised as balance. Old habits attempt to resurface quietly. Regression is always waiting. Power must be maintained. Discipline must continue. The work that created strength cannot stop once recognition appears. In fact, it must increase. Because stagnation at a higher level still leads to decline. Responsibility also expands outward. Strength is not only for personal gain. It sets tone. It establishes culture. It influences those observing silently. A legend who collapses under ego destroys more than reputation. It undermines belief in growth itself. That is why accountability becomes non-negotiable. Blaming external forces after achieving strength feels hollow. Complaining about pressure after choosing ambition sounds weak. Once power is claimed, responsibility follows automatically. There is no returning to ignorance. The standards that once felt extreme now feel necessary. The discipline that once required effort now feels like identity. Falling below that standard triggers discomfort stronger than any external criticism. That discomfort is healthy. It signals alignment. It reinforces commitment. It reminds that power without responsibility deteriorates quickly. Strength is not a trophy. It is a commitment. A commitment to maintain integrity when no one checks. A commitment to continue growing when applause fades. A commitment to reject complacency even after victory. Once capable, the choice becomes clear. Rise consistently or decline quietly. And decline, after power has been tasted, feels unacceptable. That is the responsibility of a war legend, not just to rise once, but to remain worthy of the strength earned. Everything has led to this point. The label, the doubt, the isolation, the discipline, the awakening, the responsibility. None of it matters if action does not follow. Potential without execution is fantasy. Strength without application is decoration. Awareness without decision is wasted clarity. There are always two paths available. One is familiar, comfortable, predictable. It allows old excuses to return quietly. It permits standards to loosen slowly. It whispers that growth can pause for a while, that intensity can soften, that effort can wait. The other path is demanding. It requires daily proof. It insists on consistency even when motivation fades. It demands alignment between identity and behavior. It forces action regardless of mood. One path preserves comfort. The other builds legacy. Another hard truth stands here. No one is coming to push forward. No perfect moment will arrive wrapped in certainty. Waiting for ideal conditions is simply fear asking for permission to delay. Action creates clarity. Not the other way around. Small actions, immediate adjustments, raised standards today, not next week. Eliminated excuses now, not eventually. Discipline applied in ordinary moments, not just dramatic ones. Transformation is not sustained by inspiration. It is sustained by decision repeated daily. There will be resistance. Old habits will attempt negotiation. Comfort will argue for balance before discipline is fully rooted. Doubt will resurface, reminding of past weakness. Let it speak and move, anyway. That is the difference between those who flirt with potential and those who fulfill it. Movement despite resistance. Effort despite uncertainty. Standards upheld despite fatigue. Another shocking realization emerges. Greatness is rarely blocked by inability. It is blocked by hesitation, by overthinking, by waiting for emotional readiness. Emotions are unreliable leaders. Commitment is not. The narrative has already shifted internally. Weakness was confronted. Discipline was built. Strength was proven. Now the only threat left is inconsistency. Inconsistency erodes everything slowly. It chips away at confidence. It weakens identity. It reintroduces doubt, not through dramatic failure, but through gradual neglect. Refuse neglect. Raise the standard again. Tighten discipline again. Push effort slightly further than comfort prefers. Not recklessly, not emotionally, intentionally. Every day offers the same question. Remain ordinary or reinforce strength. There is no neutral ground. Standing still is regression in disguise. Growth demands movement. Maintenance demands effort. Power demands responsibility. This is the final decision. Continue shrinking into old narratives or expand into the identity already earned. No speeches are required. No announcements, just action. Because at the end of it all, labels mean nothing. Opinions mean nothing. Doubt means nothing. Only decisions remain. Decide to rise again today, and tomorrow, and the day after. That is how legends are, not only created but sustained.